The galaxy had already fallen to the Psylocke's empire, their ruthless conquest unstoppable, and their iron grip tightening with every passing day. Entire species had been wiped out, entire worlds, enslaved, their once vibrant cultures now crushed under the weight of alien rule. It was only a matter of time before Earth would join the ranks of the fallen planets humanity had been fighting for decades. But their efforts were in vain. The human fleets were scattered and destroyed, and the few remaining colonies were too small and too weak to mount any meaningful resistance. Yet through it all there was one thing that Psylocke had not counted on: the sheer stubbornness of the human spirit, and that was about to change when Ilara received the signal. She had been sitting in her dimly lit lab buried deep within the heart of Earth's last bastion, a massive underground facility that had survived the war so far. The rest of the surface lay in ruins, scorched by Psylocke's weapons and dotted with the wreckage of fallen cities. Ilara had spent months studying ancient data logs, hoping to find some way to turn the tide against their invaders. When she stumbled upon it, the signal was faint at first, barely a whisper. Buried deep within the galaxy's oldest records, it was a transmission, one that shouldn't exist. But there it was, clear as day, encoded in a complex pattern that no one had been able to decode before. The moment she cracked the code, her heart raced, a chill running down her spine. The message was simple and direct, but its implications were world-shattering. A weapon hidden on Earth, not just any weapon, but one powerful enough to challenge the Psylocke themselves. This wasn't some new technology or an advanced weapon system. No, this was something far older, something that had been waiting beneath their feet for centuries, hidden by the ancestors of humankind. Before they disappeared into the mists of history, Ilara had read about the Ancient Ones in books and records, long thought to be myth. They were said to be the true founders of humanity, not just on Earth, but throughout the galaxy. They had traveled from star to star, setting up colonies and building empires before they mysteriously vanished, leaving only traces of their existence scattered across the cosmos. The transmission was from one of their lost colonies, or perhaps even from one of their surviving ships sent back to Earth before their final departure. And the message was clear: if humanity was to survive, if Earth was to survive, this weapon must be found and activated before the Psylocke discovered it. Ilara had no idea what the weapon was or how to find it, but she knew one thing for certain: it was their last hope, and she was the only one who could find it. She couldn't do it alone, though. She needed a team of specialists, experts, who could help her dig through the centuries-old archives of Earth's military and scientific records. She needed engineers to understand the technology, she needed tacticians to plan the mission, she needed soldiers to keep her safe, and most importantly, she needed people who were willing to risk everything for the future of humanity. Ilara's thoughts raced as she made the decision to act. No more waiting, no more hoping for a miracle. Humanity was on the edge of extinction, and the only way to survive was to seize the opportunity before it was lost forever. But time was running out. The Psylocke would not sit idly by. They would soon discover the weapon's existence, and if they did, it would be the end of them all. Ilara stood up with renewed determination, her fingers hovering over the console as she prepared to send a message to the last human leaders on Earth to gather a team and prepare for the most dangerous mission in human history. The fate of the galaxy was in their hands, and Ilara knew there was no turning back now. The signal had been sent. Ilara barely slept as she waited for a response. The walls of her lab seemed to close in on her, the quiet hum of machines, her only company, as she replayed the message over and over again in her mind. Each time she heard it, the words felt heavier, more urgent, as if they carried the weight of everything humanity had lost. The Psylocke were coming, and if they found the weapon first, all hope would be lost. The message was clear: the weapon was buried deep within the Earth's ruins, hidden so well even that Psylocke had no idea it existed. But Ilara had found it, and now it was up to her to ensure that humanity was the one to unlock its secrets. Hours later, a reply finally came, a simple encrypted message from the highest council of the human resistance. A team would be assembled and sent to meet her at a safe location. The coordinates were vague, but it was enough. Ilara knew that she could not waste time gathering the best and brightest. Her mission was too important and too dangerous to trust anyone but the most capable people she could find. She began the arduous task of sifting through the list of resistance personnel, most of whom had never worked together, and few of whom had ever ventured into the deep ruins of Earth's lost cities. The team had to be diverse experts in all fields, engineers who could understand ancient technology and military strategists who could navigate the treacherous terrain of Earth's desolate surface. Alara would need soldiers who were experienced in guerrilla warfare, as well as scientists who could analyze the weapon. Once they found it, she began to put together a list of the best soldiers in the resistance, a veteran captain named Jace, whose skills were unmatched in close combat, and his deep knowledge of Earth's geography would be invaluable. She also enlisted Darkale, a brilliant engineer whose work with advanced robotics might hold the key to unlocking the ancient tech. Alara was certain they could rely on him to repair and decipher the strange devices they would encounter along the way. And finally, she reached out to Rhea, an experienced tactician who had led several successful resistance missions, and whose unflinching leadership in the face of overwhelming odds made her the perfect person to coordinate their efforts. With her team assembled, Alara prepared for the journey. They would travel across the wastelands and into the ruins of what was once humanity's greatest cities. Earth was no longer the thriving planet it had once been. The Tylox had decimated the surface for resources, and as a result, vast stretches of land were now barren, broken only by the scattered remnants of humanity's former civilization. Broken buildings and crumbling infrastructure marked the landscape like the scars of a fallen titan. Alara had never seen Earth like this. She had only heard the stories from her parents, stories of a world full of life and bustling cities. And now the planet was barely a shadow of its former self. Still, she could feel the pulse of humanity's legacy deep within its soil, and she believed the weapon was out there waiting to be found. Alara's heart raced as she and her team descended into the depths of the Earth's forgotten ruins. Every step they took seemed to echo through the vast, empty corridors of the planet's history. The deeper they went, the more uncertain the path became, and the more dangerous the mission felt. But they had no choice. They had to find the weapon before the Tylox did, or the galaxy would be lost to them forever. Just as they reached the heart of the ancient facility, where the weapon was rumored to be hidden, Alara received a chilling transmission from one of her scouts. A Xylox scouting fleet had entered the system. They had tracked the human resistance, and they were now closing in on Earth with terrifying speed. The moment Alara heard the transmission, her heart dropped. The scout's voice was filled with panic as he confirmed what she had feared, that Xylox fleet was on its way. They had detected unusual activity near Earth's orbit, and their ships were closing in fast. Alara's mind raced. She knew that if the Tylox reached Earth before her team found the weapon, it would all be over. They would wipe out any survivors and claim the ancient technology for themselves. Their empire would become unstoppable. The team had no choice but to push forward. They couldn't turn back now, but time was running out, and their chances of success were dwindling with each passing moment. Alara's hands trembled as she closed the communication link with the scout and turned to her team. Their faces were grim but resolute. The mission hadn't changed. They would find the weapon and protect it at all costs. But now the stakes were higher than ever. Jace looked at her with his usual calm confidence. Despite the dire situation, he was ready to fight to the end. Kel was already running diagnostics on the equipment they had brought with them, checking everything twice, ensuring they were prepared for anything. Rhea was studying the map of the ancient facility where the weapon was rumored to be hidden, her sharp mind already calculating the best route to take through the ruins. The team had trained for situations like this, but none of them could have predicted that Xylox would find them this quickly. The facility they were entering had been abandoned for centuries. It was a relic of an older time before the rise of the Xylox Empire, a time when humanity had been at its peak. It had been built to protect the most important of humanity's secrets. But now it lay forgotten beneath the earth, covered by layers of dust and rubble. The entrance was hidden deep in a cave system far beneath the surface of the planet. They would have to navigate the twisted tunnels and ancient machinery to reach the central chamber where the weapon was said to be stored. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. The journey was grueling. The deeper they went, the more treacherous the path became. The air grew thick with dust, and the temperature fluctuated wildly. The walls of the facility were lined with old technology, some of it still operational, but most of it in disrepair. Kale worked tirelessly to repair the broken systems and power up the dormant machinery, while Ray led the team forward through the maze of corridors and chambers. Elara could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. With every step they took, the Psylocks were coming, and she knew they would stop at nothing to find the weapon. Hours passed, and the team made their way deeper into the heart of the facility. The tension between them was palpable, but they pushed on, their focus unwavering. As they approached the chamber, where the weapon was rumored to be stored, it was an enormous room with high vaulted ceilings and strange glowing symbols carved into the walls. The air was thick with an energy Elara couldn't quite understand, but she could feel its power. She could feel it calling to her from the center of the room. As they moved closer, the ground beneath their feet began to hum with an ominous vibration. Elara's breath quickened as she realized they weren't alone. A soft clicking sound echoed through the chamber, and suddenly the doors to the central vault slammed shut, trapping them inside. The lights flickered, and a mechanical voice echoed through the room, a warning, or perhaps a challenge. Elara's pulse quickened. The Psylocks had found them. She could feel it. They were closer than ever. But they had no choice. They had to press forward. There was no turning back now. The mechanical voice echoed throughout the chamber, sending a wave of unease through Elara and her team. The doors had slammed shut with an unnatural force, and there was no way out, not unless they could figure out what the voice was warning them about. Jace immediately moved toward the center of the room, where a pedestal stood bathed in an eerie glow. Elara could sense the weapon was close. She could feel its presence deep within her bones. The vibrations in the floor were stronger now, a hum of energy she couldn't explain. She moved cautiously toward the pedestal, but before she could reach it, the room shifted. The walls seemed to close in, and the ceiling above them began to creak, as if the entire facility was awakening. Elara motioned for her team to hold their ground. Kale was already at a control panel on the far side of the room, trying to access the systems to disable whatever traps had been triggered. But the machinery was old, and temperamental sparks flew from the panel as Kale cursed under his breath. Rhea kept her eyes on the shadows, watching for any movement in the dark corners of the room, her fingers twitching on the trigger of her rifle. Jace stood protectively in front of Elara, his posture tense as he scanned the space for any sign of danger. The hum from the pedestal grew louder and more intense until the room itself seemed to vibrate with it. The mechanical voice spoke again, this time louder, clearer, and colder. It was a command, not a warning, and it chilled Elara to her core. It told them to leave the facility immediately, or they would all be destroyed. But she didn't move. She couldn't move not when the weapon was so close. It was humanity's last hope. That Psylocks were on their way, and she was the only one who knew how to activate it. She could feel the pressure building inside her like a storm waiting to burst. She glanced at her team, seeing their eyes filled with uncertainty, but also determination. They wouldn't leave, not without completing the mission, not with the fate of humanity on the line. Kale worked furiously at the control panel, but it was clear that the system wasn't responding as it should. The hum from the pedestal intensified, the light growing blinding as it seemed to pulse with energy. Elara knew they were running out of time. She couldn't waste any more moments. She had to act now. With or without the system's cooperation. She took a deep breath and stepped forward toward the pedestal, feeling the weight of her decision. With every step she reached out and placed her hand on the surface of the pedestal. The moment her fingers touched it, the room fell silent. The hum stopped, and the lights flickered out, plunging them into darkness. A low groaning sound filled the room, as if the entire facility was shifting. Elara felt a strange warmth spreading from her hand into her arm, as if something inside the pedestal was reacting to her touch. She could hear the sound of machinery starting to hum back to life. And then she felt it, a pulse of energy radiating through the floor into her very being. It was like nothing she had ever experienced before, a rush of power flooding her senses. Elara gasped as the pedestal began to glow brighter. The floor beneath her feet vibrated with energy, and she felt a surge of realization. The weapon was awakening, and she was its catalyst. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence, but it was no longer mechanical. It was human, a voice full of ancient wisdom and power. Elara's breath caught in her throat as she realized who it was. This was no ordinary weapon, it was a sentient creation, one that had been waiting for humanity to return to awaken it. The voice spoke again, this time directly to her. It asked who she was and why she had come, and Ilara's answer was simple. She was the last hope of her people, and she had come to save them from the Psylocks. The weapon responded to her words with a powerful surge of energy that rippled through the facility and beyond, as if calling out to the rest of the galaxy. The lights flickered, and the air crackled with power. The room seemed to come alive around them. The team stood in awe as the weapon revealed its true form, a massive structure of intertwining energy and technology reaching upward toward the stars. Ilara realized that this was not just a weapon, but a force that could change the fate of the entire galaxy. The weapon responded to Ilara's touch with a power unlike anything she had ever felt. It wasn't just a machine, it was alive in a way that transcended anything human or alien, a vast consciousness that pulsed through the very air around them. The room shimmered with light and energy as tendrils of raw power shot out from the pedestal, reaching upward like they were trying to break free from the confines of the facility. The hum in the air was deafening now, a sound so deep it resonated in Ilara's chest and rattled her bones. It was as if the weapon itself was awakening from a centuries-long slumber. Ilara staggered back as the energy surged around her, her mind racing with questions. What was this thing? And why had humanity ever built something so powerful? She heard Ree's voice cutting through the chaos, her tone sharp with urgency. We need to get out of here now. But Ilara couldn't move, not yet. She felt as though the weapon was speaking to her, not in words, but in feeling sensations, like it was drawing her into its purpose, calling out for her to understand its true nature. She closed her eyes, letting the energy wash over her, feeling the connection deepen like a bridge between her soul and the weapon itself. And then suddenly, a voice shattered the silence. It wasn't human, and it wasn't Psylocks. It was ancient and full of weight, as if the very fabric of time was speaking to her. Who are you? The voice asked, its tone like a ripple through space. Who dares awaken me? Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure if the weapon could hear her thoughts, but she spoke anyway. We are humanity. We are the last of our kind, and we need your help. The voice was silent for a moment. Then it responded, not with words, but with images, memories flashing before Ilara's eyes, showing her the long-lost history of her ancestors, humanity's rise and fall, their greatness and their downfall. And then the weapon's creation, a last-ditch effort by the ancient humans to preserve their legacy in the face of annihilation. They had built the weapon not just as a tool of destruction, but as a force of balance, something that could protect humanity from any enemy, but only if the right person could unlock its power. The images faded, and Ilara opened her eyes to find herself standing at the center of the chamber. As the weapon's energy continued to pulse and shift around her, she could feel the power within it. And she realized that this wasn't just a weapon in the traditional sense. This was a living, breathing entity. It was humanity's legacy in its purest form, and it could either save them or destroy them depending on how it was used. But before she could process everything, a loud crash echoed through the chamber, and the walls trembled. The Psylocks had arrived. They were here, and the weapon was now active. Ilara knew they wouldn't stop until they had it, no matter the cost. They would tear through Earth's last defenses to claim this power as their own. The ground shook violently as the facility's doors began to open, and Ilara's team snapped into action. Jace took the lead, positioning himself at the entrance to guard against any immediate threats, while Kel worked to stabilize the facility systems and ensure they wouldn't lose the weapon to sabotage. Rhea moved toward Ilara, her eyes filled with determination. We need to go now, Ilara. But Ilara couldn't leave, not yet. She looked at the weapon and felt the pulse of its power coursing through her veins. It was too dangerous to leave it unprotected, and too dangerous to let the Psylocks control it. We can't let them have it, she said, her voice steady and fierce. But we can't stop them alone, not with what we have. Rhea nodded and turned to Jace, signaling him to prepare for the coming assault. Kale finished his work on the system and glanced up at Ilara. We've got one shot at this. If we're going to use the weapon, we have to be ready. Ilara closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the weapon flowing through her once again. And this time she understood its true purpose. It was not just a weapon of war, it was a weapon of humanity's. With their strength and determination, it would only work if they believed in it, if they believed in themselves, and the future they could still build together. The weapon needed humanity's collective resolve to unleash its full potential, and Ilara realized she wasn't just the one activating it, she was the catalyst for humanity's spirit. With a deep breath, she opened her eyes and nodded to her team. We fight for humanity, and we fight for the future we believe in. The room trembled as the Tylox forces breached the outer perimeter of the facility, their ships descending through the atmosphere like dark harbingers of destruction. The hum of the weapons still vibrated in the air as Ilara and her team prepared for the inevitable assault. Jace was already taking position near the entrance, his rifle at the ready, every muscle in his body tense. Kale had finished his last-minute repairs and was now focusing on the weapon's core, making sure it remained stable for whatever came next. Rio moved toward Ilara, her eyes sharp and focused. We need to hold them off long enough to activate the weapon completely. But Ilara didn't answer, not right away. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. She wasn't just fighting for Earth or for her team, she was fighting for humanity's very existence. She glanced at the weapon again, and this time she understood its true significance. It was not just power, it was the embodiment of everything humanity had fought for, everything they had sacrificed. As the first wave of Psylocke soldiers breached the inner sanctum of the facility, Ilara's mind sharpened. She could hear the distant thrum of their boots against the metal floor, their guttural voices speaking in their alien tongue, the sound of their weapons being readied. But it wasn't the sound of their march that filled her with dread, it was the silence that followed the moment they entered the chamber. The tension was unbearable. She knew they were waiting for something, waiting for the signal to attack. Jace was the first to fire his shot, piercing the darkness with precise accuracy. The blast rang out through the chamber like a thunderclap, and chaos erupted in an instant. Kel immediately activated a series of automated defense turrets placed throughout the room, and they sprang to life with lethal force, spraying plasma across the entryway. The Psylocke soldiers retreated behind cover, their energy shields flashing as they tried to regroup. But the weapon's power surged again, and the walls of the facility groaned as if responding to the battle outside. Ilara knew they couldn't hold off the Psylocks forever. They had to finish what they started now. She turned back to the pedestal and felt its presence again, this time stronger than before. The weapon was more than ready. It was calling to her, urging her to make the final step to activate it fully. She felt a rush of heat as a stream of energy shot through the air from the pedestal, its light blinding everything around them. The weapon's form twisted and expanded, its tendrils reaching out across the room like the hands of a sleeping god awakening for the first time. We can't hold them off much longer, Ree said urgently, as the Tylocks began to advance again, their weapons charging with deadly force. Ilara had no more time for hesitation. She turned to Kale, his eyes wide with shock at the weapon's power. But he didn't hesitate. Either we're running out of time, Ilara, what do you need from us? Ilara stepped forward, hands outstretched toward the energy that now filled the entire room. She felt its power coursing through her veins, its energy like a storm thrumming within her chest. She closed her eyes and focused, reaching deep into the essence of the weapon, calling upon humanity's will to survive and to fight. She felt the weapon respond to her plea, the energy crackling, as if it recognized her resolve. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a force that fed on humanity's spirit, their willpower, their courage, their refusal to surrender. And Ilara knew then that this was the key. The weapon would only unleash its true potential if they believed in it, if they believed in themselves. She opened her eyes and shouted to her team now that Psylocks had broken through their defenses and were rushing into the heart of the facility, their eyes glowing with the cold fire of conquest. But Ilara stood tall against them as the weapon rode to life, unleashing a pulse of energy so powerful that it rattled the walls and sent the Psylocke soldiers flying back, their shields disintegrating in an instant. The blast of energy filled the entire chamber with blinding light, and the sound of it was like 1,000 suns exploding at once. The Psylocks faltered momentarily, their advance halted by the raw power of the weapon, but they recovered quickly, regrouping and firing back with renewed fury. But Ilara felt no fear now. She felt nothing but the certainty of humanity's resolve. The weapon responded to her command, as if it had known her all along. It was humanity's fight now, and the weapon would not fail them. The energy from the weapon surged through the room in a wave so intense that it felt like the very ground beneath Ilara's feet was shattering. The Psylocke soldiers were thrown back by the blast, their shields flickering out of existence. Like fragile glass, the facility trembled, as if it too were alive and responding to the chaos around it. Ilara could feel the power of the weapon inside her veins. The energy it was releasing seemed to echo her heartbeat, amplifying her resolve and pushing the Psylocke's forces further back. But this victory was only temporary. She knew that the Psylocks were relentless, and they would regroup. They would come at them again with even more fury. Jace fired off another series of shots, his aim perfect as he picked off the first wave of Psylocke soldiers, attempting to regain their footing. Kel had taken cover behind one of the broken pillars, his hands flying over the control panels, desperately trying to strengthen the facility's defenses. Rey was on the move again, her rifle in hand, as she darted between shadows, assessing the battlefield with a tactician's eye. She knew they needed to keep the Psylocks off balance for as long as possible. But she also knew that this battle wouldn't last much longer, not unless they found a way to deal a decisive blow to the enemy. Ilara turned back to the weapon. It had stopped pulsing, but the air still hummed with its power. She felt its presence within her, its promise to humanity. She knew that this was it. This was their one chance to turn the tide of the war. She glanced at her team. Once more, all of them were fighting with everything they had, their will unbroken by the alien onslaught, and Ilara realized that it wasn't just the weapon that was the key, it was them too. It was humanity's ability to endure, to never give up no matter the odds. Rhea's voice cut through the comms. We have to push forward, or they'll overrun us. Ilara, we can't keep this up much longer. We need a plan. Ilara nodded, her heart racing, as she focused on the weapon in front of her, its energy still swirling around her like a storm. She reached out to it again, feeling the raw force of it respond to her touch. And suddenly she understood the true nature of the weapon. It wasn't just a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of control, a tool to manipulate the very fabric of the battlefield. Ilara's breath caught as she realized what had to be done. The weapon could turn the tide. It could disable the Psylocke's forces at their call, but only if she was willing to use it to its fullest extent. Kale yelled out over the noise of the battle. We've got a breach incoming, Ilara. They're pushing through the main entrance. We need to activate the secondary defenses now. But Ilara didn't move. She was still connected to the weapon, her hands trembling. As she reached out and focused on its energy, the weapon was a part of her now, and she could feel its potential, its power, ready to reshape everything. She closed her eyes and focused on the Psylocke's forces, closing in on them, their cold, calculating minds unable to understand the force they were facing. Ilara called out to the weapon in a single thought, urging it to release its full potential, to do what it was designed for. The weapon responded with a rush of energy so intense it felt like the entire facility was being torn apart. The air crackled with power, and the Psylocke soldiers froze as if time itself had stopped. The energy began to envelop them, cocooning them in a shimmering field of light. The Psylocks tried to fire, but their weapons malfunctioned, their movements slowed, as if the very laws of physics had shifted around them. Their alien minds struggled to comprehend what was happening, but it was too late. The weapon had done it. It had completely disabled the Psylocks' forces in the area, leaving them frozen in place, unable to move or fight. Ilara stood there, panting, her body exhausted, but her mind clear. She had done it. She had unleashed the weapon's true potential. But at what cost? She didn't know if the weapon's power would last, or if the Psylocks would find a way to break free. But for now they had bought themselves a brief moment of peace. Rhea approached her slowly, her face a mix of awe and disbelief. Did you just do that? Ilara could barely speak, but she managed to nod. We have time now. They won't be able to move for a while. We need to finish this while we can. The Psylocke soldiers remained frozen, their bodies suspended in time by the weapon's power. But Ilara knew it wouldn't last long. She could feel the strain of maintaining the energy. It was a fragile balance between control and chaos. The weapon had responded to her, but its power was unstable. She had unleashed its full potential, but it had taken everything she had left to do, so the air around her felt thick with exhaustion and tension. But there was no time to rest, not yet. The Xylox would recover, and they would be ready to strike back. Rhea moved quickly, surveying the frozen Xylox soldiers. We've got a small window of time before they regain control. Elara, we need to get to the control room and lock down the facility. We can't afford any surprises. Kale was already moving towards the main control station, his fingers flying over the terminal. As he worked to implement the security measures that would prevent the Xylox from accessing the systems, he glanced over at Elara, his eyes filled with concern. Are you all right? We can't keep this up much longer. The weapon's power is draining, and we need to act before it's too late. Elara's chest ached with every breath, but she knew he was right. She could feel the weapon's energy beginning to wane, but she had to keep it active. She couldn't afford to lose control. Now, not when they were so close. She forced herself to steady her breathing and focused on the weapon still pulsing in the center of the room. She needed to stabilize it somehow, but the connection between them was weakening, and she felt her strength faltering. Her vision blurred as she fought to maintain her focus, but she couldn't let go. She couldn't allow that Xylox to reclaim control of the facility. Jace stood guard at the entrance, watching the frozen Xylox soldiers warily, his rifle aimed at the closest one, as if daring it to move. He spoke without turning. We need to move fast, Elara. We don't know how long we've got before they figure out what happened to them. They'll adapt, and when they do, we'll be sitting ducks. Kel's voice interrupted from the control panel. We've got lockdown protocols in place, but it won't hold long if we don't get more power to the system. We need to reroute the facility's energy grid to reinforce the shields and weapon systems. We can't let them breach the control room. Elara nodded weakly. She knew what had to be done. The weapon had given them this chance, but now it was up to them to secure it before the Xylox could adapt. She forced herself to move forward, stumbling slightly as her legs threatened to give way. She reached out again to the weapon, trying to tap into the last reserves of its energy, but the strain was too much, and the connection was fading fast. She couldn't hold it for much longer, but she couldn't stop now either. Re-emotion for Elara to follow her. We've got to move to the energy core. We need to reroute power directly to the shields and weapon systems. That's the only way to hold the Xylox off while we finish this. Elara nodded again, struggling to stay on her feet. She felt her vision blur again, but there was no time to rest, not now. As she moved alongside Rhea, she could see the tension in her friend's face. We can't let them win, Elara. We've been fighting for this moment for too long. We can't back down now. The team made their way through the facility as quickly as they could, every step bringing them closer to the energy core. Elara could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her. The weapon was humanity's last hope, but it was fragile, it was unstable, and she had to control it long enough to ensure victory. She had already given so much of herself to it, and she wasn't sure how much more she could take, but the alternative was too horrible to consider. As they reached the core, Kel immediately began working to reroute the power through the energy conduits. But the process was slow, and the pressure was mounting. Elara could feel the energy of the weapon growing faint. She didn't know how much longer they had before it shut down entirely, but she refused to let that happen. She had to hold on long enough to get them through this. She had to. Suddenly, a voice rang out through the comms. One of the Xylox soldiers had regained control of their systems, and they were pushing forward. They knew the facility had been compromised, and they were coming for them. The voice on the comms crackled again. The Xylox were advancing fast, and they had adapted quicker than expected. Elara's heart raced as she glanced at Kale, who was still working furiously at the energy core. The rerouting process was slow, too slow, and the hum of the weapon's energy was growing fainter by the second. Elara could feel it slipping away. She could feel the connection to it weakening, and panic threatened to take hold. But she couldn't afford to let that happen, not now, not when they were so close. Rhea was scanning the perimeter, her rifle aimed at the door. They had entered, through her eyes sharp and calculating. We don't have much time before they reach the core room. If we don't finish this now, we're dead in the water, she said through gritted teeth. Elara could see the strain on her face as well. But Rhea wasn't about to give up either. The whole team was in this together, and they all knew what was at stake. Jace's voice came through the comms next. They're almost here, Elara. We need a backup plan now. or we won't make it out of here alive." Kale didn't look up from the console, but his voice was tight. "I'm pushing everything into the shield systems. We're gonna need all the energy we can get to hold them off. I don't know if it'll be enough, but it's our best shot." Ilara forced herself to move closer to Kale, her legs heavy from exhaustion. But she couldn't afford to stop. She couldn't afford to be weak now. She knew the weapon had already given them a window of opportunity, but they had to capitalize on it before the Psylocks regained full control of the facility. She placed a trembling hand on Kale's shoulder. "Kale, we can't let it slip away. We need the weapon." Kale nodded without hesitation, but his face was grim. He wasn't sure they had enough power to stabilize both the shields and the weapon, not without risking a catastrophic overload. Ilara could feel the energy from the weapon almost gone. It was fading like a dying star, and she was helpless to stop it. But she knew she had to try. She closed her eyes once again and reached out with every ounce of her will into the weapon. She could feel it flickering on the edge of consciousness, like a flame struggling to stay alive. And she was the spark that could reignite it. She focused every thought on it, every ounce of her determination, every bit of humanity's spirit, every sacrifice made for this moment. She wouldn't let it die here, not after everything they had been through. The weapon responded. It was weak, but it responded. A burst of energy shot through the core room like a lightning strike, and the hum returned. But this time it was stronger than before. Ilara gasped. As the power surged around her, the weapon was stabilizing, but only just. "We're not out of the woods yet," Kale muttered as he adjusted the console. "The Psylocks are getting close. Ilara, we need to move, or we won't have time to finish this." Ilara shook her head. "No, we finish this now," she said through gritted teeth. Jace moved to the door, once more taking a defensive position. "We don't have much time, Ilara. They're on their way, and they're bringing more firepower." But Ilara didn't move. She stood tall, feeling the weapon's energy pulse around her. As her hands reached out to guide it once more, this time with more precision, the hum of the weapon grew louder, the power building, until it felt like the very room was vibrating under its intensity. Ilara focused harder. She felt that Psylocks' forces coming closer. But she couldn't allow fear to take over, not when humanity's last hope was in her hands. A burst of energy shot out from the weapon again, this time even stronger than before. It illuminated the entire room with blinding light, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The facility trembled, and the Psylocks' forces froze again, unable to move as the raw energy surged across the room. But Ilara knew it wouldn't last long. They had to finish it now. Kale shouted. "They're almost at the door, Ilara." Ria's voice was tight with urgency. "We're not gonna get another chance. We need to finish what we started." Ilara clenched her fists, her eyes glowing with determination. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change, when humanity's will would decide their future. Ilara felt the weapon's power surge through her body, her entire being vibrating with the intensity of it, the air around her crackling, as though the very fabric of reality was bending under the force of her connection to the weapon. The room felt alive with energy, and she knew that this was the final moment. If they didn't succeed now, all would be lost. She had to hold the line long enough for her team to finish what they had started. Jace moved quickly towards the door, his rifle raised. He scanned the hall outside, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow, waiting for the first sign of the Psylocks' attack. The silence was deafening, the only sound the hum of the weapon and the heavy breathing of her team. They all knew was at stake. That Psylocks would be relentless, and they couldn't afford another misstep. Kale was still working at the console, his fingers flying over the keys, but even he could feel the pressure mounting. The rerouting of power was nearly complete, but the strain on the facility systems was immense. He was unsure how long they could hold out. The shield systems were nearly at maximum capacity, and he could see the flickering of the monitors indicating that the core's energy reserves were running dangerously low. But there was no turning back now. They had to make this work. Ria stepped closer to Ilara, her voice calm but urgent. "We've got a few minutes before the Psylocks' force breaks through the facility's outer shields. We need to finish this. We can't waste any more time." Ilara nodded. She could feel the weapon's power stabilizing a little more now, but it was still fragile. The energy inside her was both exhilarating and terrifying, the weight of it pressing down on her chest like 1,000 tons. But she couldn't falter now. She had to make the final push. She could feel the enemy closing in on them every second, bringing them closer to certain destruction. But she wouldn't let it happen. She wouldn't let humanity fall, not like this. She took a deep breath and focused once more, reaching out to the weapon, her hands trembling. But her resolve unbroken, she felt the flow of its power surge under her guidance, and with a single command, she let the energy release again, this time in a focused, concentrated blast. The force of it shook the very foundation of the facility as it shot outward in a narrow beam of pure energy. The Psylocks outside the door never saw it coming. They didn't even have time to react. The beam cut through the hallways with precision, blasting apart anything in its path and leaving the Psylocks' forces helpless before it. The weapon's hum grew louder as it fed off of their fear, their desperation, and Ilara felt herself growing weaker with every use of its power. But she couldn't stop, she couldn't let it fade, not now. The beam continued to pulse outwards, slicing through the Psylocks' troops as they tried to regroup. But it was futile, their weapons malfunctioning, their shields collapsing under the immense force of the energy. Ilara's vision blurred as the strain took its toll, but she held on. Behind her, Kale continued to monitor the systems. They're down, he shouted. The Psylocks' forces are down, they've been neutralized. Ilara, it's over. Ilara stood there, breathing heavily, sweat beading on her forehead. The weapon's energy was nearly depleted, but it had done its job. The Psylocks' forces were no longer a threat. The room was silent save for the soft hum of the fading weapon and the sound of her team's breaths. They had won, they had held the line. Rhea looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. Did we really just do it? Ilara closed her eyes for a moment, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. We did it, we survived. The team stood together in that moment, knowing that the battle was over, but the war was far from won. They had faced the ultimate test and come through it, but there would be more fights ahead, more challenges to face. But for now they had secured their survival, and humanity's last hope had become their triumph. They had proven that against all odds they could stand together and fight back against the darkness that sought to destroy them. The weapon's light flickered one last time before fading completely, and as it did, Ilara looked at her team with a quiet smile. They had done the impossible, and in doing so had ensured the survival of humanity's future.